little just public service announcement. Don't get sucked in to whatever overhyped training camp videos you see right now. Like, it's rough. The aggregators are going to be out there. They're going to be like, look at this route on air. I definitely fell victim to the Calvin Ridley stuff last year. I like Calvin Ridley more before training camp. Dalton, it wasn't just that. But I'm sure I said some dumb stuff on this show about like, oh, look at his route versus Zay Jones' route. Didn't really make a difference. So that's coming to your Twitter timeline. Be prepared and look the other way and focus on the things that actually matter. So today we are going to go over some burning questions that we have that need to be answered in training camp for the pass catchers. Dalton, we're going to go tight ends, then we're going to go wide receivers. We've kind of put this list together collectively, but you did a lot of the heavy lifting on these, and you've had some great questions, so I'm excited to break this down with you today. Let's touch on tight ends first before we sink our teeth into the wide receiver discussion after the break. First one here, what's the plan for Dalton Kincaid's year 2 usage? I think we all agree Kincaid had a really good rookie season, Dalton. He had caught 82% of his targets. He was 9th among all tight ends in targets overall. But some of the like under the hood stats, what I wrote in the piece, they're kind of middling, right? Like if you look at guys that had 75 plus targets, Kincaid was around the bottom of the pack, or bottom or middle of the pack in yards per route run, 1.59, and first downs per route run. He wasn't like a featured receiver, right? Is he going to be the featured receiver this year? I think for this Bills pass catching core to come together, and again, we'll talk about the receivers later on the show, Dalton. I think Dalton Kincaid needs to have a monster season, but a lot of that comes back to deployment for me, which again, we can talk about here.
Yeah, great job adding him to the outline. A glaring omission by me. Kincaid's so interesting. In 5 games without Dawson Knox last year, averaged 7.5 targets, a 20% target share, was the tight end 6 in fantasy. In 11 games with Knox, dropped to 4.9 targets, 14.9 target share, the tight end 18. But now Diggs is gone. Kincaid had a 29% target per route run rate without Diggs last season. Diggs and Davis accounted for 80% of their end zone targets last year. Kincaid scored 19 touchdowns in college compared to 5 to Sam Laporta. I know usage was up at play there, but there's clear upside with so many vacated targets in Buffalo. Kincaid had the 10th most receiving yards ever by a rookie tight end quietly last year. But as you point out, he wasn't elite under the hood. The low first downs per route run really is kind of a scary mark because that's a good future indicator. So I settled him tight end 5 right behind my guy Kittle, behind the clear. It's kind of a clear tier 1 really with McBride, Laporta, Kelsey, and Mandrews just because he gets so much action in the red zone. So that's where I've settled. But I could see someone talking Kincaid into being as high as number 1 or below Kittle and Pitts. I don't feel super strongly here. He has a wide range of outcomes and certainly a great spot though with Buffalo opening up so many targets.
Yeah, you mentioned the name Dawson Knox. I do think that's a critical thing to talk about. Again, going back to that group of 75 plus target tight ends, Kincaid's 60.6% slot route rate, according to PFF, was the highest because he was mostly like a slot receiver. He wasn't really an inline tight end. But he was used more like that when Dawson Knox was out. But again, when Knox comes back in week 14 through the AFC Championship, AFC divisional round, Kincaid averaged a 57% snap share. Like those two things are related. So I struggle with Kincaid just in terms of like, I think he's fine where he's going in fantasy, but can he be a 120 target player? Can he reach that top 3 tight end upside? I think that's really interesting when we consider that he was mostly used as a slot receiver as a rookie, not an inline tight end. They have a guy that they like as more the inline tight end in Dawson Knox there. And all these receivers, and again, we'll talk about the receivers in a second, all the receivers there are probably going to be maximized as slot players. So it's an interesting group to try to fit together and sort of imagine how Kincaid has this 120 target upside. Or is he going to be a guy that settles in the Jake Ferguson, Cole Kmet zone of like 97, 89. I think he goes higher than that. But, you know, when we look at the top tight ends last year, Evan Ingram, ridiculous 140 targets, Hawkinson 127, Njoku 120, Travis Kelce 120, Sam Laporta 118. And then obviously your guy, Trey McBride, had 104, but mostly that was in the second half of the year. I think prorated, he would come out much higher than that.
Yeah. Kincaid is so much upside, and then you can see the downside too, as you point out when you look at a granular. And it's interesting because, as you said, Curtis Samuel, all these guys can play the slot. Shakir. So how he's deployed is something that we need to pay attention to in the preseason.